Let's speak to Eylon Levy, though, former Israeli government spokesman, of course. Eylon, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Hello, good morning.
Thanks very much for joining us. A couple of things to mention to you. We're going to get to the BBC in a minute because I'm sure you might have something to say about their rather ludicrous propaganda documentary on behalf of Hamas, which even they have now admitted was an absolute disaster. But let's talk a little bit about what the IDF have said. They've admitted, and many people had said this at the time, but obviously there were times and places to say it, that they completely failed with minimum border security on that terrible, awful day of October the 7th. Why have they decided to say that now, do you think?
The IDF has been investigating since the October 7th massacre how such a horrific catastrophe took place, how it's possible that the army allowed us to be invaded by thousands of Hamas terrorists who completely overran our border defenses and murdered 1,200 people, most of them civilians, taking 251 people hostage into the Gaza Strip. And they found that Israel dramatically underestimated the threat. We didn't take the enemy seriously. They told us that they hated Jews. They told us they wanted to destroy Israel. They told us they were going to attack. And we just didn't take them seriously. And the lesson that Israel is going to take from October 7th is that we can never afford to underestimate our enemies again. And when they say they're coming for us, we're going to believe them. Yeah. When the Iranian regime chants death to Israel, it means you definitely can't let it acquire nuclear weapons and get the weapons of mass destruction to bring death to Israel. When the Palestinians and their allies in London are chanting from the river to the sea, they really mean it, that they want to destroy the state of Israel and not live in peace next to us. Yes. And that's the lesson Israelis are going to be taking from the initial investigations from October 7th. Right. We let our guard down. We can never do that again.
Yeah. And as far as the security services are concerned, is there any blame laid at the door of the government or Benjamin Netanyahu? Because there were some accusations of that last year or the year before. But is there any kind of ramifications for them?
What we're talking about now specifically is an internal military investigation into the military's own failures. The investigation didn't look into the political leadership. For that to happen, we need a state commission of inquiry, and that is what many people within the Israeli public have been calling for, a full state commission of inquiry that will look at everyone involved and see the extent to which the political leadership, as well as the military, underestimated the threat of Hamas. We thought it could be contained. We thought it could be bought off. We thought that if we had a high-tech fence, we would be able to tell if there were advanced sign of an invasion, but only a full state commission of inquiry can look at the whole process of decision-making that led to the atrocious failures of October 7th.
And what is that security like now on that fence, on that border fence? Because obviously we could see footage of them as they filmed themselves cutting through the fence and driving through it with bulldozers and whatever. It didn't look that difficult to break through. Is there more security on that particular part of the fence now?
Since October 7th, Israel has been waging a campaign to destroy the Hamas military inside Gaza. That's how we have over 20,000 Hamas terrorists who have been killed since the invasion of October 7th. Right now, we are at the end of phase 1 of the ceasefire. Hamas has released 33 hostages, most of them alive, some of them were murdered in captivity. And the question now is what is going to happen with phase 2? In phase 2, Hamas is meant to release the rest of the living hostages in exchange for an Israeli withdrawal. But Israel is saying, we're not going to withdraw if it leaves Hamas in power, and Hamas says we're not going to relinquish power. So Israeli forces are now on high alert. Soldiers have been told to be on alert for a possible call-up of reserves again in case we go back to the fighting. And that is a very realistic scenario now. If Hamas refuses to release more hostages, refuses to lay down its arms, refuses to surrender, we could be going back to the war to finish the job of destroying the Hamas terror regime.
Yeah, we wish you an awful lot of luck with that. Let's talk about the BBC, talking about the Hamas terror regime. How to Survive a War Zone. Gaza was the name of the documentary, now been roundly disregarded, really, by anybody with half a brain, apart from Gary Lineker, of course, who thinks it's a wonderful piece of journalism. But even the BBC have now said serious and unacceptable flaws happened in the making of the so-called documentary. I'm not going to list them all, but it seems incredible to me, but perhaps not to you, that the BBC would think this was an appropriate way to go forward.
Yeah, the BBC actually gave licensed taxpayers money to Hamas to produce this documentary. You really couldn't make it up, except it's not surprising.
Except they did make it up, right?
No, it's not surprising, because anyone who's been paying attention knows that the Hamas terror regime controls all the information coming out of Gaza. The journalists inside Gaza are either paid by Hamas, they work for Hamas media, or they're Hamas content creators, or they're simply cowed and intimidated by Hamas, because Hamas Gaza is an authoritarian state where even people who want to speak out against Hamas are not free to do it because they'll get a bullet in their head. I've been warning since the beginning of the war that Hamas is controlling what you are seeing coming out of the Gaza Strip. You've never seen images that are inconvenient to Hamas. You've never seen the bodies of dead terrorists. You've never seen them shooting rockets from inside civilian areas. You've never seen them shooting from out of civilian buildings, because Hamas has been choosing what you, the British public, see from inside Gaza.
Or killing their own people, indeed. In fact, in addition to this boy Abdullah that we're looking at now, who turns out the son of a Hamas operative, who Gary Lineker thinks is not a
Hamas
terrorist.
Minister. A Hamas minister, because Hamas is the government of Gaza.
A Hamas minister, yes, but of course Gary Lineker says, oh yeah, but he's not a terrorist because he's a minister in the government. And you go, how stupid are you? How many people do you think work inside of Hamas who are not terrorists? I would say pretty much zero, right? But also, in addition to this boy Abdullah being the son of the Hamas government minister, they also used a guy who's frequently appearing in Hamas propaganda videos, who's apparently been killed 12 times, according to the appearances that he's made. He's appeared as a doctor, he's appeared as a journalist, he's appeared as, I think, an ambulance driver, he's appeared as a hostage. This guy just keeps appearing in one movie after another, made up by Hamas, and the BBC didn't even recognise him.
Of course. Everything you've seen coming out of Gaza in the last year and a half has been a carefully staged, managed production by Hamas, which controls what you don't see. And unfortunately here, you have people at the BBC who are so committed to this narrative that they fell into this confirmation bias. The documentary confirmed what they wanted to believe instead of doing their basic due diligence. Hamas is the terrorist regime that governs Gaza. It's not just a terrorist group. It's the regime in Gaza. It's the regime that decided on October 7th to declare war on Israel, to invade Israel, to take Israeli civilians hostage, to burn people alive in their homes. And it's that regime that Israel is now working to remove from power. And I really think this should be a salutary lesson for everyone around the world. Some basic media literacy. Ask, where is your information coming from? And if your information is coming from an authoritarian state governed by a jihadi regime that is intimidating journalists and pays journalists and decides what information comes out, you need to be more skeptical, because Hamas is taking the world for a ride.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Eylon Levy, former Israeli government spokesman. Thanks very much indeed. Have a great weekend.